What was Adam Montgomery trying to hide on March 4th when he took that U-Haul delivery van into the murky waters of the Revere Marsh at 5 o'clock in the morning? Are the Massachusetts Bay tides holding the answer? Hey folks, thanks for tuning in to Profiling Evil. I hope you'll hit that like and subscribe button and share us with your friends. You know, I've appeared on Court TV a number of times regarding the possible location where Adam Montgomery might have hidden Harmony's body. If you remember, he had his buddy rent a U-Haul van because it was cheaper than getting a rental car, and they drove down from Manchester into the Boston area across the Tobin Bridge. And we know that because they were captured on license plate recognition software. And there they headed out somewhere, probably, according to investigators, the Revere Marsh, a place where this guy would have gone a number of times when he was growing up. Vinnie Politan asked me why I would consider such an area as a possible location where Montgomery might have tried to dispose of what was left of Harmony's body, or perhaps other evidence. In response, I offered these comments.
Mike King, you know, you try to get inside the mind of someone like Adam Montgomery, and it would make sense that you would go somewhere that you are familiar. Someplace, oh yeah, I know that. I know what I can do. I know where we can get rid of this bag. I know where we can dispose of this, and no one will ever find it. What are your thoughts tonight, Mike, on all of this?
I think you're hitting the nail on the head, Vinny, and that is that a predator is going to pick a place that they think they can go and do whatever it is they're planning on doing, disposing of a body in this particular case, and be able to do it without somebody stumbling across them. And think about how hard that is to get to an area where somebody just doesn't happen to be glumping along on the same dirt road or in that same area that you are. But as Bob was describing that, and especially the fact that this is a marsh-covered area, and there are roads going over bodies of water that are constantly moving based on tidal influence, it's a great way to think about why he might select that location. And I love maps, and as you put those maps up, it really got my brain going pretty quickly because I did a little computation on my own before we got on, and this is an hour and 8-minute drive from where he started to get out to that point. And that van was taken for a whole lot longer than that. So you start thinking not only about all the disorganization that was going on with Montgomery before this day, but all of the disorganization that was probably going on as he was driving and trying to figure out if, in fact, he was out there to dump a body or pieces of a body, where am I going to do this without somebody picking me up?
Well, as we continued to discuss the case, our conversation kind of shifted to the difficulty there is in trying to find human remains in a muddy, murky marsh. Now, this is truly a huge challenge when you consider that all of the evidence leading up to the time that they drove down into that area, that during that time, Adam Montgomery probably made multiple attempts to dispose of Harmony's body. Those attempts that came out in court and through testimony included dissecting her, using chemicals to dissolve her body down, and frankly, flushing into the sewer system what he could actually get into the sewer system. We also have to consider the fact that there's just natural decomposition that occurs in a body, evident by the stains that were in the ceiling tiles and that horrific testimony of Kayla when she saw him squeezing the fluids out of Harmony's body. During our conversation, Vinny asked me about the difficulty of finding what might be left of Harmony's body in this watery environment. Now, consider the fact that making this even more difficult is the fact that if it was in the marsh, it would be filled with thick, heavy mud at the bottom of the marsh. So there's a lot of mud, a lot of cattails and foliage, and of course, a lot of animals or predators that would consume anything that went into the water. Let's watch that.
Mike King, we're talking about water searches here and the state of the remains of Harmony Montgomery. What are your thoughts there about what you're actually looking for in the water at that point?
I think we have to take into account that if everything we're hearing is true, that there was a process of allowing this child to decompose over several months, even with the idea that maybe there was some freezing during the day and not at night, that much of the body fluids that dogs would alert on and other kinds of things are probably gone. And then if we believe the stories about the lie and the attempts to break this body down even further, then it's getting even tougher, Vinny. And you know, we've talked about cases that I've been able to work on where we've recovered bodies that have been in rivers for even a short amount of time. Finding skeletal remains in the bottom of a marsh or a river is going to be next to impossible, because those bones will settle into the silt and they'll disappear as the currents move things around. So this is such a huge challenge that unless they can find something like a tooth or something they can identify, this may be an exercise of just proving to the public we're not going to stop.
How significant is it in this case that they have not been able to find her?
I think the significance of it is that they're not going to find her. I think that they've done an exhaustive search in 3 different states, but this is Adam Montgomery, who's used to manipulating the criminal justice system, of thinking exactly how he's going to do things that in a way that is really going to fool people. And I think his statements in those phone calls from the prison say a lot. You know, he's mocking people. You know, how do they think they're going to find anything? What a waste of money. This is just, I think, classic of his malevolent personality. And I think what it says, and what's really sad, is that it's unlikely that they're ever going to find her remains.
Like I said, I was appearing multiple times on court TV as this trial was going on, which Adam Montgomery was found guilty of. And if you haven't watched any parts of that, it was so frustrating that this guy didn't even show up for the court proceedings. But a few days into this thing, I also appeared on court TV to again continue the discussion of what might possibly have happened when they took this trip down into Boston and then north up into the marsh.
Okay, we're talking about a big area here, potentially. I want to show you a map so you can understand a little bit of what these areas are like and where they are. Let's take a look. Put it up on the screen. There you see the Tobin Bridge. Again, just like we did on the show last night, the prosecutor doing the same math equation, and you look at these areas that he's talking about. First, you've got the Rumney Marsh Reservation all the way to the north there. Okay, so that's a marsh. It's a reservation, right? It's going to be swampy. Then you've got Chelsea Creek, a creek, that's water. You see the rivers that are running right by there. Obviously, the Tobin Bridge goes over there. Sales Creek, another a part of the water. Also, look on the side there, you got the North Shore Road, and that's running right on the coastline, and there's a whole bunch of water to the right there. So you think about this, and let's not forget the timing of this, okay? This isn't a search where she goes missing and the search is immediate. I mean, they don't even know about this until 2 years later. And then they start to get some of these details and put them together. So there's a good opportunity that the search hasn't been done as completely as possible at this point. And for folks in the public who are just anywhere in this area, what we're looking for is that bag. It's the bag. There it is, the CMC bag. This is what investigators are looking for. So I mean, if you see that, you know, it's a lot of times a wanted poster, you have a picture of someone. No, this is what you're looking for, because this is the bag that contained whatever remained of Harmony Montgomery. All right, let's bring in our guests, and we've got some good ones tonight. In Los Angeles, California, retired FBI special agent, has done so many searches, especially in water. Bobby Chacon is with us. In Salt Lake City, Utah, retired police commander, host of the Profiling Evil podcast, and author of the book Deceived. Mike King has also done a lot of water searches. And in Jacksonville, Alabama, forensic death investigator, professor of forensics at Jacksonville State University, host of the Body Bags podcast, Joseph Scott Morgan, can talk a lot about what we're really looking for here. So just all right, Mike King, as always, I know you take a close look at this, your Profiling Evil podcast, but you've also put together something yourself tonight. Can you explain what you put together for us?
Well, I'll tell you what, Vinny, I mean, I spent 300 miles on the road today thinking about this darn thing, and I just kept going back to the two things that we know, the toll times. We know when he went north, he doubled right back immediately, but then he went north again. So if we look at that roughly 25 to 30 minutes, this is really the area that he could have gotten to and got back. Now, he could have taken a road to the north to get back and make his way back up north to home eventually, because we don't see him coming back through the tolls. So we can start to get a little more microscopic in the examination of the geography. And as we learn more, and perhaps if there are pieces in the interviews, some admission that was made, something from the friend, maybe we can get a little more. But we're going to be able to start tightening it down. But again, this is looking for a microscopic needle in a big old haystack.
I had taken some of the maps they had and I refined the area where Adam Montgomery most likely deposited whatever evidence it was that he was trying to dispose of. But based on the information that was coming out, specifically those tolls, I was able to reduce the area down in which he could have traveled and got back and gone through those toll booths and be captured again on license plate recognition data. So as I prepared for that appearance, it struck me that the area where the evidence was probably destroyed, again, might actually be smaller. And so I created some maps and talked about those on Court TV.
All right, let's take a look at the screen. We've got some pictures so you can kind of see where this is. We mentioned the Rumney Marsh Reservation. You can see where the incinerator is, just to the north. I mean, it's right there. It's right next to the marshes. And we can look even closer up to have an idea of what this whole layout is. Mike King, I think the only issue here might be getting access to inside the incinerator. I don't know if there's places where people leave trash there. I don't know. But how about your thoughts about that and the fact that some of these ashes are then discarded in the marshes in that area?
Yeah, that was really what impressed me last night about the judge's comments, was the idea that is there spillage getting into the ecosystem? And of course, they probably don't want that mentioned, but if that's the case, would that make it more difficult for a cadaver search? And these are kind of some areas I need to lean on Bobby and Joe Scott about. But the idea would be, is there a specific reason to do that? And the only reason would be to further conceal whatever evidence there is in this case. And I think it's got to be pretty darn limited after that series of months in which he was clearly doing something to speed up and move different parts of this child.
Our discussion then naturally gravitated from the Revere Marsh north to an incinerator that's located about 1.5 miles to 2 miles to the north on 107. In fact, one of the guests, a judge, brought that up, and it really intrigued me. So let's listen to that exchange and get some of my comments and their comments, including comments from Special Agent retired Bobby Chacon from the FBI and forensics expert Joe Scott Morgan.
Yeah, Bobby, I think the judge's great point that she made was, he held on to her for months and then had a plan and went to a specific area, an area that he is very, very familiar with.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know, like you said, if the public has access to that incinerator, like if they can drop stuff off, and if they do they take any kind of identification, or do they have a plate reader or any kind of surveillance that they can access on whether he was there or not? Because quite frankly, if she was incinerated and then the ashes are kind of distributed out into the water, there's a very small likelihood that she'll ever be found. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's absolutely ghoulish when you start thinking about, Kayla had that bag between her two kids in a stroller as she's pushing it along. He brought that into the restaurant where he worked several times and put it to the walk-in cooler. this guy is just that second level of that level of evil that, you just come across once in a while that you just shake your head at. Like, why was he carrying her remains around and doing the things he was doing with it? And so, I hope he somehow finds faith in jail and tells them where he found her, or maybe before between now and sentencing, if he thinks that it could maybe impact his sentencing, he might come forward with it. I don't know. But this is going to be a very difficult task.
Yeah, but there's two sides to that coin as well. If it is, like you say, gunky, if it's thick, that might be a saving grace, I suppose. That in some way her remains could be retained in that area. And I still think, will that head trauma still be visible after all this amount of time? Let's say that we do get an intact skeletal remain contained in those bags. That's going to be a big question there, I think, for me.
Well, after that segment, I was bushed and I called it a night and went to bed. But before I continue on with my story, I want to pause long enough to remind you about choir practice. And I hope that you'll sign up so that you're getting the notifications on that. So hit the like and subscribe button below. Choir practice is back. At your request, I brought choir practice back for a live session on the first Monday of every single month, beginning at 8 p.m. Mountain Time. Now this month, which is just a couple of days from now, March 4th, I'm going to have on retired New York City Police Lieutenant and Commander of the Homicide Unit over in Brooklyn, Tom Joyce, with me. We're going to be joined by Chief Retired Dr. Kenny Kinsey, who became really well known as because of his testimony in the Alec Murdaugh case. We're going to be talking about all things true crime. So make sure you're joining us. And we're going to have a special guest with us, Ashley Solomon, who is the granddaughter of a man who disappeared long time ago. She reached out to Profiling Evil for some help, and we're thrilled with the results.
Hey everybody, look who I'm hanging out with. And listen, I'm not attending choir practice, but I just wanted to tell you that you need to be watching Profiling Evil YouTube. Don't miss it. I'm telling you, there's something there for you every single time. I never miss, you shouldn't either.
Hey, make sure you're checking out Profiling Evil choir practice. But now let's get back to the story about what's going on in the Adam Montgomery case. Like so many times before, I woke up in the middle of the night with this thought about the ocean tides. And I wondered, at that particular time of day, 5 o'clock in the morning, what were the tides doing? And could those tides have been influencers in the choice that Adam Montgomery made to go down there at that particular time of the day? 5 o'clock in the morning that really became the question in my mind that I had to sort out. Was Adam Montgomery doing this so he could take advantage of an incoming or an outgoing tide, something that would possibly help transfer the evidence that he was disposing of to a more remote area? So I climbed out of bed and I went down to my computer and opened up one of my maps. And I want to thank my friends at Esri for letting me use their maps. I examined the map and I collected the tide tables for that area. And for those of you who are wondering why that seems so important to me, let me just kind of explain tides a little bit for those that maybe live in mountain regions like I do. The average tide difference in that area of Boston is about 9 feet. That's a huge amount of difference. That means there is a lot of water that's coming into the marsh during an incoming tide and an equal amount of water going out toward the ocean in an outgoing tide. Now, these outgoing tides, or falling tides as people call them, can carry debris out into the creeks and channels and tributaries that are associated with the area where they're deposited. What that means is that anything that is thrown into the water, displaced by the moving water, could end up in the furthest parts of this area or going out into the ocean. So it's really important that searchers are checking, based on the tides, things that might snag articles or create eddies and pools. It might be things like pilings from bridges or jetties. Those are really good places to search, and a place that I would recommend they're really looking at. Now, on incoming tides, it's the same kind of location, but we're just kind of reversing everything. Again, a good place to search might be in the deeper water, just beyond the edge of a flat spot. Again, a place where things could settle down. Now, Adam Montgomery would have been arriving at the marsh around 5 o'clock in the morning. And according to these tide tables, this would have been a period called a slack tide. Nothing was happening. It was at the end of a low tide, so water was drawing out into the ocean, and then there was a period before the water starts to push back in, that slack time in which Adam shows up there. According to the tide charts, and I've got them showing here on the screen, it seems to me like this slack water period of time would be a great time to get these things deposited in a lower location where they would always be covered. If you could deposit something at a low tide in the water and it's underground, perhaps anchored, it's going to always remain underground and anchored unless it somehow breaks free. Now, the next few hours would be an incoming tide. And if that wasn't secured to the bottom, it would then push that stuff, body parts, fluids, maybe other pieces of evidence, inland or further into the tributaries as the water pushes forward. And that would cause me to focus on inward locations like we saw on the river in the map that I showed earlier. Not the river, but the tributaries. So with that in mind, let's just explore one more time a map. We're going to start in the city of Manchester and the locations that were key in this particular case, make our way down the freeway and down across the Tobin Bridge where those tolls and cameras collected the license plate information, and then out into the marsh areas. And think about, if you were this predator, what kinds of locations you might think about depositing evidence, and most importantly, what the tides would do to that evidence. All right, to kind of level set where we are, we're again in Manchester, and in that community, there were a number of locations that became very important in this investigation. There was the home where they lived prior to the murder occurring, and I don't know if it helps, but we'll zoom in so you can see the area from an aerial imagery standpoint. But from there, they had a number of places that were quite important during this investigation. One is the Families in Transition Shelter and the Habitat Opco, where they were doing some shopping. And if you think back on each of these events in the case, maybe it'll help kind of put this all into perspective. And then, of course, they have the time when they drive to the Burger King. And from the Burger King, you remember this is after Harmony's at least dying or deceased. They leave the Burger King, they drive down this road, heading back over to the apartments where they were going to stay the night at the Colonial Apartments, and the car dies in this intersection right here. They make their way over to the Colonial Apartments. And I'm a little confused on if this is the actual location where the friend brought the U-Haul vehicle from, but once that U-Haul is obtained, then they make the drive down into Boston, across the Tobin Bridge, and that's where those tolls are picked up. And by all reports, it sounds like they crossed over, were collected on license plate recognition data, somehow went back and then returned again. And the speculation is that they then made their way up to the Revere Marsh. And in that Revere Marsh, they would have deposited whatever evidence believed to be possibly Harmony's remains. Now, there's also a question that they might have gone further north, another 1.5 miles, 2 miles, to the incinerator that was there. But the thing that becomes so interesting with the discussion on the tidal influences is that if, in fact, they were in this area and drop the body in this particular area, for instance, it would make sense that an incoming tide would push the remains up this tributary, and that in this area might be the location to look. Again, there's not a lot of places where anything that's pushed in could escape unless when the later outgoing tide pulls it back out, and then from there it could be going out into the bay, and from the bay into the Atlantic Ocean. So the chances are really strong, in my opinion, if you're looking, that the body would potentially be somewhere in this location here, perhaps where they searched. But one of the other things that was kind of interesting to think about as a part of all of this was that if we were to take into account any boat ramps that happen to be in the area, there are only a few of those that you can actually drive to. And so if you then think about any routes to the boat ramps, it starts to limit again. But again, think about those tidal waters and where the remains could wash based on tidal waters. And finally, it made good sense in looking at the time to, as I talked about on Court TV, to bring this down instead of that huge 60-minute plus area to consider down to a 20-minute travel area. And this represents what that area would look like. Well, what are your thoughts on this one, folks? I mean, I am only assuming that law enforcement considered the influence tidal waters can have on the movement of evidence deposited into these bodies of water. But I want to know what your thoughts are, and I hope that you're going to put them down below. And folks, make sure you're checking us out on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And if you like podcasts, check out Profiling Evil Podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. Make sure you've gone over to profilingevil.com, our website. It's a place where you can stay up to date on everything that we're doing at Profiling Evil. But most importantly, it's a place where you can sign up for the BOLO. That's our digital newsletter, and it stands for Be on the Lookout. The only way you're going to get the digital newsletter, it only comes out quarterly, is if you've signed up for it. So make sure you go there and sign up. And I promise you, I won't be using your email address or selling it to anyone else. It will remain for this specific purpose. So thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. Please consider checking out our merchandise and always think about picking up our books. My two favorite that I list on the website are Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult, and She Knew No Fear. So please check them out. And thanks again. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.